Chapter 28. Our first operation. I'm going to pause for a minute or two and become an armchair general and give yous blokes a bit of background. Phuoc Tuy province, or as my mate Smithy calls it, Phuoc Tuy province, is located in the southeast corner of South Vietnam. To the east is the South China Sea. To the south is the Delta region. In the corner between these two is Vung Tau, a rather large provincial city of French influence. It has a harbour and Australia's logistical support group was located there. The Yanks had a large airbase and the South Vietnamese had a military academy. It was also a centre for R&C, rest in country, for Australians, New Zealanders, Americans and VC. Yes, the VC. Saigon is located to the west about a 2-hour drive away. The province is mostly flat save for a few scattered mountains. Most of the population is located in the east. As you move inland there are smaller and smaller hamlets surrounded by rice paddies until you meet the jungle. Up the centre of the province is Route 2. The enemy had 3 units in the province: D440 Battalion, D445 Battalion and D67 NVA Engineer Battalion. This map shows how they carved up the province. The Australian infantry battalions carved up the province as well. 2 RAR covered the area west of Route 2, which was Chow Duke, C41 Company of D440 Battalion, Country, and the D67 NVA Engineer Battalion were quite active as well. Our first operation was to deploy to the Nui Din Mountains. A fair bit of planning went into each operation. The AO, area of operation, had to be carved up for each company. The CO allocated areas to the company commanders and they broke their AOs down for their platoons, depending upon how they wanted to operate.
They say don't go on Moberton Mountain if you're looking for a wife.
The most important feature of Australian operations in Vietnam, and one of the main reasons for its success, was the artillery support. Wherever we went we had artillery support. As we were nearly always outside of the range of guns from Nui Dat, temporary bases had to be set up and the guns were located closer to our. As you can imagine, that was a logistical nightmare and involved a lot of personnel who prepared and manned the fire support bases. Platoons were allocated guns which they had priority over, but other guns might be made available should the need arise. The platoon commander prepared his orders and set out a patrolling program. The foe, forward observer, in conjunction with the platoon commander, identified possible targets along the patrol route which the enemy could use for ambushes, forming up places, FUP, that kind of thing, and registered them with the guns that night. The next day, as the platoon moved along its patrolling route, the foe advised the guns of the platoon's progress and the guns were set on each of those identified targets. So let's say the foe identified an FUP as M115. The guns would be set to drop rounds on the target. Should there be a contact near M115, the foe called, M115, 3 rounds fire for effect, or something like that, on the radio and bingo, rounds were in the air in seconds. He then adjusted fire by moving the fall of shot left or right, drop or add. Those artillery guys were lifesavers for the infantry. Now you know as much as I knew, or maybe that should be as little as I knew. Enough of this bullshit and let's get back to us dumb grunts. And me. It's all about me. Davo, our section commander, obtained his orders from Pat, the platoon commander, and relayed them to us. We all whinged and whined as required by tradition. We were heading to the Nui Din Mountains. The other rifle companies would deploy by helicopter, but we were going to walk in. That's right, our first big operation and no insertion by chopper. We were going to walk across the rice paddies and then up that bloody great mountain. At least we were trained for it, walking up hills that is. My gear was already packed, all I needed was ammo. That was distributed by Tojo, the platoon sergeant, and given to our Section 2 IC. For my SLR, I had 7 magazines of 20 rounds, 1 magazine on the weapon and 3 magazines in each of the front pouches of my webbing. The webbing was a belt with a shoulder harness to spread the weight over my body. On the web belt, I had, in addition to the ammo pouches, 2 water bottles, a bayonet and a bum pack. In the bum pack I'd have the day's meals, mossy repellent, toilet paper, and lots of other stuff that escapes me now but was very important then. I carried 300 rounds for the machine gun, 100 rounds slung over each shoulder, just like those Mexican bandits in cowboy movies, and 100 rounds in my bum pack. I also carried the spare barrel for the machine gun which was in a golf bag slung over my shoulder. The stuff for the gun must be available at any time, so the rounds and the golf bag was slung after I had my pack on. We carried 6 days food and 4 days water. In addition to the 2 water bottles on my webbing, I also had another 2 on the outside of my pack and a small water bladder that sat inside the pack. The 6 days food was made up of 2 days Australian and 4 days Yank rations. The ration packs were broken down and most of it was thrown out as it was impossible to carry it all. We learned to swap stuff around, and as I am a non-smoker, I swapped the cigarettes in the rations for something else. A typical day's food for me would have been thus: breakfast, coffee and a tin of noodles, looks like Chinese short soup. Lunch tube juice, I had a bottle of lime cordial concentrate, and a tin of pecan cake roll, and dinner coffee and a tin of meat-based food and a tin of fruit. Spread over the 6 days would be some dog biscuits, powdered chocolate drink, lollies, cheese and jam and stuff. We also had 2 small tubes of condensed milk for the 6 days. The Yanks had powdered whitener which tasted like, well, powdered whitener. We had barely enough food to survive on, given the grueling physical demands on our bodies. Is it any wonder that we were always hungry and thirsty? I'd place the food and water bladder in the top half of my pack together with some toiletries, a razor, toothpaste, a toothbrush, and boot cleaning gear. I also had a couple of smoke grenades and a pair of socks in there as well. In the bottom half I had my sleeping gear, a ground sheet, hoochie and silk inner liner, no sleeping bag as it wasn't cold. I'd be dressed in the green shirt with sleeves rolled down, green trousers with the pocket on the side and tightening tabs at the waist which were really great. No underwear. All this gear was extremely heavy. In addition to making you grunt when you moved, your eyes bulged when you initially threw the pack, with all the other stuff, on your back. The important thing was to ensure you had nothing on you that would snare in the jungle, so there was no gear hanging off anywhere, no grenades, no knives, no nothing. The movies where guys have grenades, knives and all sorts of shit hanging off the webbing may make them look tough, but it can be very dangerous as it is so easy for stuff to get snagged. Grenades could easily lose their safety pin and, boom, it's good night. The final touches were the bush hat, known as the giggle hat, and a sweat rag around your neck to help wipe the sweat away from your eyes and to keep those little bits of debris like small twigs and leaves from falling down your neck and getting rubbed into your skin by the gear on your back. Oh, I mustn't forget the rifle, a 7.62mm SLR with a field dressing strapped around the butt. The SLR was a hard hitter. Get hit by one of those 7.62 rounds and you don't get back up. The weapon was robust if a little heavy, and it was perhaps a little too long for jungle work. Going through the jungle was hard work. You've probably seen the movies with guys bashing at the jungle with machetes. We didn't use them because they were too noisy, and after 10 minutes of slashing at the jungle you would be buggered anyway. No, for thick jungle we used secateurs and quietly cut our way through. Well, the first few blokes did and the rest just followed in single file. For our first operation, I was very apprehensive. Who knew what was going to happen, but everyone put on a brave face. We trucked down to the south of the Nui Dins. The company shook out and headed for that big bloody mountain in front of us. It looked quite daunting. All I could think about was the other companies riding to their AOs in choppers. Bastards. Patrolling across the rice paddies was very difficult. There was a shallow layer of water with a thin layer of mud and then a hard surface underneath. That meant our boots slipped quite easily in the mud and it was hard to gain traction. Past the rice paddies and into the foothills we grunted and bent our backs under the weight. And the going only got worse. It was hot and humid as we sweated and grunted more and more on our way into the mountain. Progress was extremely slow and it wasn't long before we had a casualty with heat stroke. The guy was from another platoon and I could tell he was in trouble. He was delirious and I could hear him sobbing. There was no way he could go on. He was choppered out. I've mentioned before how tough it was in our training back in Australia. That was nothing. The mountain was really killing us, but we gritted our teeth and soldiered on. A few days passed and we hadn't seen any enemy. The Kiwis and the other companies had contacts, they found caves that had been occupied, and they came across bunker systems with caretakers who bugged out when the good guys showed up. The only thing we saw was an old campsite that hadn't been used for some time. Where were these bastards? Why didn't they come out and fight? We soldiered on for a few more days. Nothing. Was there a war going on there or not?